Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This year's Chicago Humanities Festival is entitled Animal, and as such encompasses a wide range of discourse. I must say, as a former singer, I was fascinated by the session called The Enchanting Voice of the Whale. However, it's the subtitle of the festival, What Makes Us Human, is going to be the content for today's session, The Operatic Animal. Animals come in all shapes and sizes, from the simple to the exotic. Among human animals, there is a perception that the art form of opera exists at the more outlandish end of the spectrum of human activity, and therefore those associated with it are themselves exotic. Over the next hour, you can make up your own minds in the company of an operatic animal. María Martínez graces the major opera houses of the world. Her work has been critically acclaimed at the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, the Paris Opera, the Bavarian State Opera in Munich, the Deutsche Oper Berlin, the Glyndebourne Festival. It goes on and on. She's also become a firm favourite with audiences at Lyric Opera of Chicago, where she's previously performed the roles of Marguerite in Faust, Nedda in Pagliacci, and Mimi in La Bohème. In September, she thrilled a huge audience with her performance of Madama Butterfly at Lyric's annual free concert in Millennium Park. And this season at the Civic Opera House, she's performing two roles, Desdemona in Verdi's Otello and the title role in Dvorak's Rusalka. In fact, it was Anna Maria's recording from the Glyndebourne Festival that you heard just a moment ago. So, without more ado, please welcome one of the most sought after and delightful operatic animals inhabiting the planet today, María Martínez.
Hello. I've never been referred to as an operatic animal before. I love it.
So today we're really going to talk about the physicality of singing and how it all happens, because you sit in the audience and it sort of washes over you, but so much actually goes into what you hear and experience. And I want to begin, Anna Maria, with producing the sound. Now, newborn babies can cry for hours without exhaustion. It's their parents who become exhausted. And they have this amazing sound that is penetrating and piercing. To me, it's the very essence of what a singer does. How does this come about?
That's a great question and great observation. I would add to that, when you see a baby not crying, sorry, but breathing, and when they're sleeping, they're really just, in their whole belly area is just filling up with air and then just releasing that air. And I think that it's coming from there. They're really allowing their entire torso to fill up very comfortably with air. And then they're using that air to propel their sound. And so much of what we do has to do with air and breathing. And we also talk about, let's say, placement of the sound. Some people refrain from that word because they don't want to fix a spot in which to focus your sound. But this area here will be a nasal resonator, let's say, and then your air. And when you have an even degree of muscle tension and airflow, then that sound will carry, and that's what babies have.
Yes, because if you listen to where the sound is coming from a baby, it's right between their eyes. And to me, that is what a singer needs to find, so this spins on, supported by the breath. Would you say now, if we went round the audience today and asked them to breathe, apart from Evan Boyer in the back row there, most people would breathe in a totally different way than from the diaphragm. But why do you think over time that happens?
Well, okay, I have a theory, which is kind of light, but I would say a little bit of narcissism and a little bit of fashion tells us to stick in our gut, to bring our tummies in, and so we start breathing higher and higher. And that also disconnects us emotionally from what we're feeling. Sometimes when, if you're under stress, you realize that you hold it in your stomach area or your gut right here. That's your truth code or decoder right there. That will never lie to you, your stomach. And sometimes that tightens up when we're nervous. or we feel very uncomfortable, and then we don't breathe deeply enough. And I think that, yeah, I think women in general, do you find that you've got to like stick in the tummy, and then we just lose that natural ability that we're all born with? It's our birthright. We just have to get in touch with it once again.
It's something maybe I'll ask you later. I'm fascinated by this. I mean, are singers born? Or
I used to answer that by saying, no, everybody can sing. And I thought, well, I want everybody to be able to sing. And I think if it brings you joy, and into whichever capacity, I mean, whether professional or just for your own pleasure, it really should be that. It should bring you tremendous joy and satisfaction. But I do think, and I'll use the example of a gymnast. You know when you see a child, a small child that has a natural ability for gymnastics, for sports, you can tell it's a talent they were born with. However, if they don't develop and train that talent, it won't really go anywhere. It'll be a raw talent, but without being polished. And I think the same with the opera singer. You have to have been born with some ability, and then you can train that further.
so really what you're talking about are sensations, physical sensations. And of course, it's so difficult to put a sensation into words. But can you tell us what it feels like to sing? And for example, do you use any mental pictures to help with that sensation?
There's a lot of abstract thought. I mean, I know that not every singer thinks that way. I do, but I think that definitely the breathing, the sensation of breathing, and I encourage all of you, if you feel comfortable, just taking a deep breath and feeling as if you're breathing into your seat. So imagine, that's an abstract thought, that your lungs are, let's say, where your thighs are. And then when you're taking in that deep breath, that's as far as you're filling up. What happens is that then your entire torso starts to fill up, and then your stomach area starts to expand just a little bit. But don't you feel more relaxed? It's a really nice feeling. So when you fill up with air, you know, just to take your deep breath to support your sound, it should be a very centering feeling as well as empowering feeling. And then we talked about, you talk about here, right between the eyes and the forehead, when babies cry, you want to start thinking about sound from here and then coming out this way.
Do you think that all singers, irrespective of their voice types, whether it be sopranos, tenors, basses, countertenors even, produce their sound in the same way, or is the technique adapted for individual voice types?
While every voice is different and every singer has a different need for vocal language, and by that I mean the way in which they understand what they need to do and what they're doing. As many people are on earth, that's how many perspectives we have. So every singer is going to be unique. I do think that when it's healthy singing, it's going to be a very similar approach. It just might be with different words and a different perspective that they find it. I will emphasize that every single voice type is different. And I think one of the most difficult voice types to understand if one is going to be a teacher is the tenor voice, because it's the most, let's say, unnatural. You know, a man's voice is not meant to be singing those high notes. You know, a tenor's high C is spectacular.
And boy, do they know it, they make a fuss about it.
They do make a fuss about it. We love our tenors, but oh yeah, they make a fuss about it.
You spoke there about well-being, physical health, well-being. Obviously, you're not a concert pianist, you're not a concert violinist, you are your own instrument. And obviously, your healthy body is fundamental, allowing you to perform. When do you know that you can't sing? And the second part is I wanted to remind you of the opening night of Othello when Falk Struckman had to cancel after Act 1 because he was under the weather. Fortunately, a cover was in the wings and took over. But have you been in the position when you have been feeling far from well but didn't have the luxury of a cover ready to take over, and how do you get through it?
I've been in all of those circumstances, and for Falk, he's such a dear man, and he tried, and when the performance was beginning, he felt he could. Because what happens is you can be under the weather, but as long as the throat area and your vocal cords are intact, you should be fine. I remember a run that I did, it was the first time I ever did Nedda and Pagliacci, and it was in Amsterdam, and the Cavalleria Rusticana cast, that was the first part, it's usually the double bill, and the Pagliacci cast, we all got sick. And yeah, it was pretty scary. And some of the cast members did lose their voice. They couldn't even speak. And I was sick, but it was, I would say, from the base of the neck down, if that makes sense. So even though I had a fever every day that broke right before the performance, I remember telling my Silvio, don't kiss me for real. Wash your hands, and we'll stage it in such a way where I don't want you getting sick. And I was able to do it, and the voice was fine, and I felt physically terrible, but the adrenaline pulls you through. And I think that you know when you can't, when there's just the core of your sound isn't there. You feel when you're warming up that there's like, if you do like a very easy hum from the top to the bottom, if it's even and if there's no break in the sound, like no pause. When I say break, I mean a pause in the sound, then you know everything's okay. But sometimes you just can't phonate on every sound. Now, if you keep warming up a little bit more, some ENTs, ear, nose, and throat doctors will say, well, that's great, because if there's swelling in one cord, the more you warm up the other cord will match the swelling of the other one, then you'll be fine. You can't sing for 5 days after that, but for this one concert performance, you can. So you just have to listen to your own body. I think that that technique can really get you through a lot. And what also happens, I just wanted to add this, is if we're under the weather, we, the same example I was giving before, if we're in pain, sometimes we just don't breathe and we just hold. And when we feel we're not at our top form, we get scared, and I don't think we breathe the same way. And that's actually when you need to use your body more. And you should be fine after that performance, after that experience, as long as you're very in tune with your body.
Okay, so we now have a well-produced raw sound. What happens next in refining it and taming it and making it beautiful for us to listen to?
Well, I think that it's an exploration that you have with your instrument, much as you have with yourself throughout your entire life. I think that we're all, always and forever, a work in progress. There's never a time when we say, oh, I've arrived. I've learned everything I'm going to learn. I've read every great masterpiece I'm going to be interested in reading. Vocally, oh, I could never be better than this. No, there's always so much more to discover. And I think that you want to play with the colors, the sound that you make. You think a lot about the emotion that you are expressing, the meaning of the words. And we've talked about this before, how music will describe what no word in any language ever could. So while the character that you're portraying has a specific text, the orchestra, therefore the music and the orchestration, how each instrument is used within the orchestra will show different colors of what the character is really feeling inside. That's what I call that beautiful subtext that you can't really put words to. And if you think about that and allow your mind to go there, you will find the colors. Now you need to support that again with your awareness of your body. Much like a dancer, I really do have to emphasize that. We really do use our bodies as much as dancers do, but in a different way. So before a dancer is going to jump, they will plie. You know, we prepare. If I may just give the example of our wonderful Johann Botha as Otello. When I am embracing him in our first duet, before certain phrases that I know are very taxing for the tenor voice in general, how he breathes and how I can just feel him taking the amount of time he needs to fill up properly, and then the support, just that slight tuck in the muscle. Phenomenal here in the abdominals. It's like a voice lesson. It's a school of singing to be near him while he's doing that.
Support is an interesting word and a very confusing word.
Yes, it is.
Could you talk a little bit about what I was at the Masters, would you talk about support? I've never heard it explained that way, but it was very interesting.
It's, you know, when we say support your sound, I think a lot of us, you know, even if we've been doing this for a long time, we you know, get the deer in headlights and the question mark and say, huh? Support what? So it's very confusing. And I like to use the Italian word appoggio, which is to lean. So if you're leaning into your sound, and I was working with one of the wonderful sopranos of the Ryan Opera Center, and I said, lean against the piano, because the side of the piano is going to be more or less where your abdominals are. Just slightly lean into that when you're singing this phrase, and boom, you get so much more attached to this whole part of your body, much more engaged. So sometimes I think that when I'm taking a breath, or the first consonant of the word that I'm singing is digging underneath the ground, so that anchors, and then you just lean into it, and it's phenomenal, especially if you're nervous. And I say that for anything. If you're going into a party and you're with a bunch of people you don't know and you're nervous, take a deep breath. When you inhale, just imagine that it's going underneath the ground that you're standing on. You will feel tremendously anchored and very grounded. And I think that helps tremendously when we're thinking about, here comes this note. And Johan does it beautifully. That's exactly what I'm referring to.
Can you talk a bit about emotional communication and capturing the inherent ability to move people with the sound?
With communication, I think what I love most about this art form, and there are many things to love about it, is the ability to connect with people, and also the joy of connecting with the music, with the colleagues, but connecting with the audience. When you understand how sacred that is, and I don't mean sacred in a religious sense, but just in a psychological sense of how sacred that is, you take much more care about how you're going to express each and every word, and sometimes realizing that some of the notes that you're singing, even though there are words placed, are not about the words, they're about the sound and the visceral connection to that sound. You can have screaming at one point if you're furious, if you're in an argument, or a wail of a cry if you're so devastated by something. And it's that which you have to ask yourself as the interpreter. Is this particular note about sound, or is it the word that has to be projected more than anything else? But I think that I, for one, before I start the performance, I just get myself in that space of being of service and being there to connect. And the audience is actually always co-creating with us. The audience is never a passive member in the audience. It really is a co-creative process. When the performance is done, even if it's documented, videotaped, it's gone. And only all of us that were there in that space have shared that experience. And I just want to add that when we take our bows, I think when we're bowing, we are acknowledging and thanking the audience for that experience that we just had with all of you.
Let's talk about words now, because singing isn't just a succession of beautiful sounds and a vowel sound, and words can complicate everything.
Even in real life.
Yes, even when you're not singing. Is there anything you have to do with words within a musical phrase, or where the words lie in your vocal range? Any tricks or things you have to do to make it singable?
I would say that for the masterpieces that exist, the word setting was done so beautifully for where the voice is at that time. I mean, the composers knew what they were doing, and sometimes you find a greater challenge with modern day composers that are just exercising that muscle, so to speak. And they're beginning to put some text together with where the register of the vocal line is. And it takes a while, I think, to really understand where each voice type is going to be most comfortable, and where there's a passaggio for each voice is going to be different, which is kind of a shift in the register where the voice kind of goes in another place. And when you have that passaggio, let's say for a soprano, if you're looking at the music staff, at the top, let's say the top blank space, which is either going to be an E natural, an E flat, an E sharp, and then the F above that, and that's going to be like one of our shifts in the passaggio. Then we have another one about B natural, which is right above a high C. And you don't want to sit in that passaggio and then have some high notes, although some famous composers have done that, which make the role really, really hard. And then you have to anchor a lot more. But I think that you do have to modify sound.
What do you do with the sound?
You do have to modify the sound. I think that sometimes you have to find, if you darken it, like let's say it's an ah, a very bright ah vowel up on a B flat, let's say right before a high C, you might want to make it more of an AW, like like awe and father, which would be a dark ah sound. And that just gives you this kind of shape. If you want to think in the abstract, that kind of shape in your hard palate going into the soft palate gives you more room. And so you do have to modify. And that's another point of, is it about the sound or is it the word?
And miraculously, even though you distort the vowel sound to the audience ear, it sounds as if you've actually sung the word as you would speak it.
And you want to think that bright sound, like they say that bright ah, but you're actually singing a darker color. You're right, and it does come across hopefully beautifully and then clearly to the audience.
Now, operas in the language of the audience, let's talk about English. You often get the criticism, I don't mean you personally, I said singers are criticized. The audience will say, well, I don't really understand what he or she is singing about. I can't make out the words, and it's doubly frustrating because it's actually the English language, which is what I speak. Are there ways around that? Why does it happen? And is there something more that can be done other than someone using surtitles?
It's a very good question. I think a lot of it has, yes, the vowel sounds are important, but it's the consonants that are so important, so that we have the beginning of the word and the end of the word. And sometimes those take an awful lot of air to support and to make that sound. But the more articulate, the articulation of each word, the clearer it is, I think the easier for the audience. But also remember, because we're not mic'd and you have the beautiful orchestra, sometimes it's a matter of balance, and it's, are you hearing every word? Are you hearing every syllable of every word? But that's why also acting is so important, and being expressive with the color, and body language is so important, because what you didn't hear necessarily, you'll see. You'll see with what we're showing you with our faces, our eyes, our bodies.
Okay, you mentioned the word color. It was a wonderful segue into my next question. You hear people talking about coloring the voice. What exactly is that, and why do you do it? You
want to shade your voice. You want to express different emotions, different thought process of the character. I was talking to a group of students the other day, and I said that in the Otello score, Otello has to say a particular line with voce soffocata, which is like a suffocated voice. So how would that sound? You know, and you're going to say something like this. You know, that kind of feeling, and you want to make sure that your sung voice has that quality to it, because why? It expresses an emotion, a feeling, and that's what we have to be showing you. I mean, we have this beautiful text to exclaim, but more than anything, it's there to serve the feeling that we have to explain. And a lot of composers will tell you the dynamic that they want, and that's the intensity with which they want you to sing a particular phrase or note. Piano being soft, forte being loud, every shade in between, and then going beyond that loud and less than that soft. And sometimes with a long sustained pitch, you start very softly, then you want to make it as loud as you can, and then bring it back down in volume and intensity, and it's about feeling.
Actually, could you talk about Otello or Desdemona, because I think a very good example of having to use colours and variety is in her Willow song in Act 4. It's very static, so it's really all about what you're doing with your voice. Could you talk us through the Willow song, yeah. Maria?
Do you mean what some of the things that she's going through?
Yes, and how you have to convey it with different colours.
Yeah, because it's definitely in the register that's not very demanding for the voice. So it's in the middle register for her, some high notes, but it's mainly low and middle. And when the composer writes in that register for the soprano, I think that the goal is definitely to exclaim the text and to get the words very, very clearly to the audience. And in that moment, she's remembering stories. The stories have been very important to Desdemona, and in the opera, we're missing the first act of Shakespeare's play, where you learned that she first fell in love with Otello through his storytelling of all of his wars, his battles, everything, and she just fell in love with this man, how he thinks, how he is. So she has, you know, you can say about somebody that they've got big eyes, you know, only eyes for someone, and in her case, because of her listening, big ears also for him. And she's very confused as to what's happening. She doesn't know why she's lost Otello's trust and love in her. And I think that she starts to make the connection with this lullaby type of story, very sad story, that she remembers hearing as a little girl. And then she begins to piece everything together, and she sees the parallels between the Barbara in the story of the Willow song and her own life. And so you can sense some despair, definitely sadness, some hope. And when she's saying salce, 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 she's hoping for a response. And then sometimes you hear the English horn responding. And as Bertrand de Billy, our wonderful conductor, has pointed out, it's their duet, in a way, that Desdemona and the English horn are having this duet. And she's always strengthened and comforted when she hears it. And the last time she says salce, salce, she doesn't hear that anymore. And that's when she says, good night, Emilia. And then she realizes, I mean, I don't think she realizes exactly what's about to happen to her, but she knows it's not good. And she's afraid of being alone. And she says sings a very dramatic high note to say goodbye to Emilia. And then the Ave Maria is so beautiful, the Hail Mary. She's definitely holding on to her faith to help her at this moment where she needs hope more than anything else, and a sign, anything. And it starts in the E flat, so in the bottom of that staff that I'm talking to you about, the music staff, and it's very calm and just very few high notes. So it's all about exclaiming that prayer in a very quiet way. There's nothing big and bombastic about it. And even the high note that she sings at the end in A flat is written to be very, very soft. And it should be completely transparent. And that's her connection with the Virgin Mary and with the divine. I think that is her soul truly connecting with that light.
Now, it seems to me that many singers today are totally fixated on the sound they make, and that, to me, seems all they're really interested in doing. And if you listen to recordings from the 1950s and 60s, singers at that time, I think, were more prepared to take risks with what they did, to convey the emotion and the meaning, even if the sound wasn't always beautiful. Do you think that's true? And if it is, why has the emphasis changed?
I think there is, with some schools of singing, I think that that's happening a lot, much more concerned with the sound and sometimes listening to themselves too much, especially when I work with young singers. I'll say, you know, stop listening to yourself. If you can hear yourself perfectly, guess what? We can't out here. So it's not about you enjoying yourself so much. Let us enjoy it. I say it with love. And hopefully it helps. I think that times have changed a lot. And I think that singers had longer careers back in the 50s and 60s, which means that they were singing well into their 60s. And they had all of this trajectory in which to grow as a person and as an artist. And also their form of travel took a little bit longer. They weren't jet-setting everywhere. They were taking ships. They had time to rest, so that they could really continue working on their technique and finding ways to show different colors for the emotions of the character, much more dynamic and much more expressive. And today's singer has a lot of pressure. They're starting younger. I think they're being pushed into heavier repertoire too soon. It's one thing to know where your voice is headed, but it's another thing to give the voice that huge responsibility too early on, because I think it takes its toll on the voice. And the more tired the singer is, the less colors they will have at their disposal. So I think that they're moving too quickly, and then literally moving from city to city too quickly. We have to actually be very disciplined and say, no, I need, you know, maybe 3 days of rest after this long run when I fly over to Europe to get acclimated to the new time zone. I mean, there are a lot of challenges physically going on.
But it's also very difficult for a younger singer with publicists around, with the media pushing contracts at them to actually say no to that and look after their vocal well-being.
And I think my favorite of all time recorded sopranos is Mirella Freni. And she said, she's quoted as saying, she said no in her career more than she said yes. And she was very wise to do so, because
she's still singing.
She's still singing, and it's still gorgeous. I mean, to me, it's heaven on earth to hear her sing. And she was always so wise. I think she sang Susanna in The Marriage of Figaro for many, many years before she ever thought of singing the Countess, and she was well into her 40s when she did her first Countess. And that just shows you a lot. That's only Mozart, you know? And she, even though she did the movie of Madame Butterfly, I believe she never did it live. And she said it was just too much for her, emotionally, but also the actual demand of the singing, the physicality of it, she felt was too much for a live performance. So this is an extraordinarily wise person, and I think that we need to, sometimes I feel that current generations in technology in general have a very short memory, and we have to go back further and see, why did these people last so long? How is it that they made that happen? How did they make their choices? And to have the courage to say, no, I'm not ready for that yet. Thank you very much. Please keep me in mind for something else, but not yet. And I say to them, you want to be, you want to be 70, open your mouth and sound like you're 40.
So we've got to the point where the sound has been well produced. The words are full of clarity and meaning. But as an operatic animal, there's far more to do, unless you're in what we Europeans call a park and bark production. You need to be actually moving and doing things on stage which involves extreme physical energy. I mean, the Willow song and the Ave Maria leads into the final scene, which is very physical and demands of you a lot of physical energy on stage. How do you deal with that with regard to what you're doing vocally at the same time?
You know, it's funny that the Willow song and the Ave Maria seem so physically static, and it's actually where I'm most involved physically within my body to just make those sounds come out the way that they do, hopefully doing everything that he wanted and asked for on his page. The last few scenes, or the last scene when Otello is beginning to make it quite clear that her moments are numbered, what we do to make it more physically believable and menacing is to do combat, and we have our wonderful combat person. We have Nick Sandys who worked with us, and he actually shed a lot of light on the character and the trajectory of the character for me personally. And he makes sure that everything that we do that has to do with combat is actually very easy and flowing. And when Johan, our Otello, is looking like he's taking my arm and his arm and putting it this way and hurting my neck, I'm the one doing all the movement. And when it looks like he's throwing me on the bed right before he smothers me, I'm actually doing that. And when he slaps me across the face with the back of his hand, he never touches me, and I'm the one that does everything else. So that the quote-unquote victim in the scene has to be the one in charge so that you're not hurt. And with that last scene, there's a little bit of running around and all of that, but it's actually quite...
But people will also ask you, how can you sing when you're flat on your back?
Mm-hmm. That's really neat, and it just it just confirms how important it is to be in touch with your body, so that when I'm taking my breath to sing, because I'm lying down, I can actually feel my back breathing into, resisting, again, leaning into that apoyo that I'm talking about. I'm leaning into that mattress, and I think, wow, I wish I could sing the whole thing like this. This would be fabulous. It's actually easier, believe it or not, because you're just leaning into it.
Now, you spoke a minute ago about Otello slapping you in Act 3, and I have to say, if you haven't seen it yet, I've never seen anyone look so dazed after that slap. It really looks real. And following the slap, you have to fall. Now, I know an awful lot of work went into this stage fall, and you go through various stages, physical stages, to actually do that. Can you explain the choreography of that fall?
And again, that was Nick who gave us that. Usually when you're staging something like this, because I mean, thank God and knock on wood, I've never been slapped, so I hope that doesn't happen, but I've never experienced that. So I would think, okay, here comes the slap, and down I go. And then what Nick Sandys, our combat instructor, was pointing out is actually no. You get slapped, you don't know what hit you, you feel that you're losing your balance and you're trying to hold yourself up, your ears are ringing, you're completely disoriented, so you've got that trying to just keep yourself up, and also you realize that there are other people around you. So you're just struggling to stay up, and then you can't anymore. You lose your balance, and it's overpowering to you, and you fall on your knees. Then he says, on the ground, and cry, Otello says. And so the following stages are fear again, that he's going to do something else, and then looking around and realizing that everybody's staring at you, and you wonder how much did they see, what's happening, ow, ouch, this really hurts, and then I want to see if I'm bleeding by any chance, and I'm scared to touch my face because it might really hurt. And then I see my hand after that, and then as I'm saying, I'm actually of this earth. Or not of this earth, but I'm low to the ground and nothing and insignificant. And it's the first time that Desdemona understands her own mortality. So as I'm taking the hand that has touched where I was just hit, which is the complete, or I would say just the full beginning of her demise, then taking that hand out and understanding the mortality that she's experienced, the awareness of that. So there's a lot to it, and I guess in a brawl, I hope none of you have ever been through something like that, there'd be that struggle of trying to stay on your feet too, and just everything else that happens.
Now, performing opera is a collective activity involving many people. How does the group dynamic affect what you do?
We really are an ensemble. We really help each other out, and you know how they say in theater that there are no small roles, just small actors. Really, there is no small role. Everybody's extremely significant in the story, and we must work together as a team and make sure we're all in the same show, you know? And that can take on many meanings, yes, many layers. And I think that the characters with which you have most interaction, that's really important. So I think one of the greatest things, one of the greatest gifts you can receive is a long enough rehearsal period, or at least a good connection, a good understanding of each other when you start rehearsing, to give each other what you need. It's not just about, here comes my phrase and I'm going to sing it. You've got to listen very well, and also listen with your eyes, and you're glued to your character, and even though you know what's coming next, your character doesn't. So you have to keep it fresh, and you have to keep paying attention the whole time. And I think that paying attention to each other, looking at each other, trying to read the body language of the other, is what keeps it alive and has a lot of magnetism in and of itself. And I think the stronger that dynamic between the characters involved, the more magical it is for the audience.
Okay, so you've worked through the X number of weeks of Othello rehearsals, and you're all on the same page, and you're all interacting with each other. And then what happens? Someone goes sick. Now, this is when the group dynamic changes quite dramatically. I know Desdemona doesn't have much to do with Iago, but for example, if you're singing the Countess in Figaro, and suddenly your Susanna goes sick, or you're singing Fiordiligi and you have to work at the last minute with a new Dorabella or a Ferrando, how does that affect you, and how do you work through that?
Well, I always, whenever we have a replacement, I want to see them, I want to give them a hug, and just let them know we're all on the same page, and let's make this work together, we're all rooting for you. And I think that when you've pointed out the Mozart operas that have the recitativi, those are really tight. Those are tight conversations, and sometimes you're finishing off each other's sentences. And you want to have at least the time to go through those recits together, hopefully, if there's time before the curtain goes up, unless it's in the middle of the show. If it's in the middle of the show and or you just don't have time, I think the best thing to do is, this is what I like to do, is just go to them and say, what do you need? Do you want to take these 30 seconds and go through, is there any of this recit section that you need to review? Just so that you have that contact with each other. And then I'm watching them like a hawk.
So they become really the focal point of that performance.
Yeah, but also something shifts just in a split second, and you have to get at least, it's like a visual awareness that comes to me of my character. It's like I have to know where I'm standing now. Okay, now I can be there for the other person. Does that make sense? Before you bring in the new person, because your identity within the show could get lost within yourself unless you establish that. It takes a split second. Just get that visual of who you are in the show, then you can be there for them.
But what happens if it's the conductor who goes sick? Has that happened to you?
Yeah. And or sometimes I've been the one to step in. Actually, with Johann, it was a Turandot in Vienna years and years ago, and the Liu had to cancel. We didn't even meet before the performance, and he came out and was like, "Who are you?" Yes. So when we met again here, I said, "Actually, we've met before. You may not remember, but I killed myself for you." So with the conductor, you just want to touch base. It's again the same joy and sense of responsibility in connecting with our audience we have to have with our cast and with the whole production team, because we're connecting and we're creating, and then we're co-creating together. It's like a microcosm microcosm and macrocosm, and everyone is just really working together.
Now, as I said in my introduction, Anna Maria is singing 2 roles with lyric this season, Desdemona and Rusalka. Now, Desdemona is a new role for you, whereas Rusalka, which you've been critically acclaimed for in many places, is turning into one of your signature roles, I think. What are the differences for you between Desdemona and Rusalka, emotionally, technically, physically, whatever?
Yeah, they're 2 different operatic animals. Couldn't resist. I think one of the things that they have in common is that they both seek the light, and they both are love, and they go for love first. So they're not about ego, they're not about coming from fear, they're about coming from love and hope. And they have a very different dynamic going on in their existence. And we know Desdemona's story, and with Rusalka, depending on how you view her, some people see her as a mermaid. I like to see her as the element of water, actually, so she'd be invisible to the human eye. And then she wants to be human, she wants to have form, and she wants to have a soul, and she has fallen in love with the prince who's been coming to these waters for some time now, and she wants him to see her and to feel her and to love her. And this is driving her to the point of sacrificing everything she's ever known and everyone she's ever been near, her family, her world, everything. She will sacrifice that to be with him, and more importantly, to have a soul.
And vocally?
Vocally, I mean, it's interesting. Both of them are kind of central in the register for the soprano, and then have their occasional high notes. So again, the text is very important for their composers, for Dvorak and for Verdi, to exclaim. But I would say that Rusalka is much more dramatic at points. She has moments of absolute fury and despair, and the only time that we really see that despair, but it's through confusion in Desdemona, is in the Act 3 confrontation that Otello has with her, and she still doesn't understand what's going on, but she's answering him with her own, I want to say character, with her own inner strength, and she's quite confrontational in there. She has no problem showing him that. But in Rusalka, she's just completely confused in the prince's world, you know, when she's lost her voice and she's been mute, and then her father comes back, and then she's just venting everything. And that's actually the most difficult part to sing, that aria.
So the Desdemona is new. When did you know, and how do you know when to take on a new role?
Well, she's such a beautiful role, and I dreamt of singing her for a long time. And I think that what happens is that for every singer, certain roles lead you up to being ready to take on yet another role. And I've had the great fortune of singing several Verdi heroines before this point, and some Puccini heroines that I think are actually more technically demanding than Desdemona. And Desdemona has more of the bel canto approach, and that training that I have, or that approach that I have vocally, which is the more fluid lines, the beauty of sound, that's your focus with that kind of role. And the Mozart schooling and singing so much Mozart for so many years, I think prepared me for that. But once you've done Butterfly or Louisa Miller, Marguerite, in what I sing, then yeah, Desdemona would be a comfortable fit.
You gave masterclasses this week for some of the singers from the Rhine Opera Center. When you're coaching or giving masterclasses, do you learn anything about yourself as a singer, as an artist, through your teaching and guidance?
I think you definitely do, because you have to try to figure out how would you do something so that you can find the proper language with which to express that concept and that idea to the singer. So something that I may have just taken for granted that I do and don't think much about, when I'm asking the singer to do that and they don't understand what I mean, I really have to think about it. And sometimes I'll try the phrase myself to see what it feels like, and then I'll explain to them what I think it feels like to me, and hopefully that will help them, and then I can break it down into more technical, scientific things. But it definitely, you learn a lot about yourself. Right. Yeah.
I'm going to open the floor for questions in a moment or two, but one last question from me. Now, animals tend to have a behavioral pattern that seems to be predictable and fairly constant. So how does Anna Maria, the operatic animal, behave on a performance day? Can you talk us through your typical routine?
It's not very
If
interesting.
you can.
Sure. Sure, I am very much a creature of habit. And, one thing we didn't say, but I think it's really neat. You all know that the human is the only animal that will trip over the same stone twice. And the rest of the animal kingdom, they get it the first time. We don't. So something's going on there. I aim to sleep a lot. A good 8 hours the night before is phenomenal because the more rested you are, just the same way an athlete before they have a marathon or a big competition or something, they're going to want to sleep well the night before. We need that as well. And I love my café con leche. Yes, and my espresso and my hot milk, that's sacred to me. I make sure I run the day of a show, just a little bit. I'll run less. But I definitely need to make sure that the body's awake and in tune because not only to produce sound, but to physically show the character to you. I mean, Desdemona is about 18 or 20. I'm not. So my job is to inspire you to, with a lot of imagination, imagine that I am. So I need to be physically awake and limber to show that to you. And then one thing that I learned that Mirella Freni does before each show, and I've done it all the years that I've been singing, is a huge bowl of spaghetti with extra virgin olive oil and sea salt about 2 hours before I start to sing. Works every time, and then you're burning all that throughout the whole show, and it's phenomenal. It's very simple, very simple. And I don't run a lot of errands. That's the only other thing I don't do that day.
But definitely no alcohol.
No, that will dry you out, and that will impair your clarity of thought and your speed of thought, because you have to be on your toes completely. I mean, as we know, anything can happen in a performance, so you've got to be very alert at every moment. And while you can enjoy something afterwards, that's great. You never want anything that will compromise your concentration or possibly dry you out.
So do you have any questions for Ana Maria? Yes, that's great. Yes, sir.
Does the costume designer, is that person dictated by your need to breathe in and out? I'm thinking of Otello with his robe, but obviously has no constraint.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully our designers do take that into account. This being an already existing production, the designs are set, and then you have your costume fittings, and you can speak with the costume department and say, I actually need a little more here, a little more there. And the costume department here at Lyric is phenomenal, and we actually had about 5 fittings, which is unheard of, just to get the first dress you see me in, and I wear it again at the end, to get the proper silhouette. It just wasn't working, and we couldn't quite find it. And we were looking for youth, simplicity, clean line, and even though it's a simple cut of the dress, it wasn't quite doing it. So while it wasn't constricting my breathing, we were adamant to get the right silhouette to give you that fantasy as clearly as possible.
Yes, the lady there.
How does the environment impact the operatic animal, the sets, the costumes, the direction? Even if you've done Roska 15 times, the production changes.
Yes, that's a great question, and it will change based on the concept of the production team. Every director and his or her team will be different, and they will have their own view of telling the story. And in Roska, for example, I've done different productions with vastly different perspectives, and one was based on fairy tale, which was phenomenal and just free range, and that was a theater director who had us constantly asking ourselves when we entered a scene, what did we want to do? With just one verb, one word, what were we doing with that space as we came in? And it was phenomenal. And another version of Rusalka was based on a very tragic story of abuse within a family in Austria. And I say that unfortunately, that view worked with the text, but it was in Germany, and it was very disturbing to do that. But it worked, and it was not fairy tale at all, and very draining emotionally to go into that world and into that experience. So you have everything, really. Everything will stretch your imagination. You have to be, I would say, I talked about trees when breathing and, well-grounded. You want to be well-grounded, but you also want your limbs to be very limber and move with the wind so that you can adapt to each new scenario and new perspective.
Yes, sir.
This is a question that that comes to mind from the movie Topsy-Turvy about Gilbert and Sullivan. It's about corsets, I guess, specifically, but more about costumes as a function of helping you support in general. Because in that movie, I think it's when they went to Mikado, they forbade any of the singers from using corsets, and all of them had used it before, and there was this panic. And I just wondered whether costume helps you at sometimes. Did it help singers more at another time? Or
I would say I love Coco Chanel because I believe thanks to her we stopped with the corset. She revolutionized women's fashion. And she liberated us. And
well, this was men too. It was actually one of the male singers who was.
Yes, it was Nanki. It was the tenor, of course, that was really worried. Yes.
There, I would say to until today, every singer likes it different. Some want the corset and want it very tight, so that they're again leaning, resisting against something. Yes, well, actually, corsets are an active part of our costume repertoire. While I will wear them if they're required, I ask them to not be so tight because I don't like that constricting feeling. I like to feel that I can breathe and that I'm loose and just physically agile.
Yes, sir, right at the back.
I have a question about, there's a certain kind of operatic sound that some people find very artificial. They sort of, whoa, that. And
What are you talking about?
And so, as an example, when certain opera singers have done crossover type things, South Pacific or a musical like that, sometimes it sounds wonderful. And sometimes, when you compare it to a Broadway singer, it sounds operatic, in a bad sense. What is it that makes some opera singers, singing sound that kind of artificial feeling?
Well, there's a lot of head voice in what we do versus a lot of chest sound and belting. I don't know if you are familiar with that term, belting. A lot on Broadway. It's more like it's much more from here, and they take that kind of chest voice all the way.
Very Ethel Merman.
Very, very Ethel Merman. Yes. And I'll tell you, I think that each voice is very different in what it can do. I thought that I would go more into musical theater when I was about 18. That was my passion. And at that time, musicals started to go more into the rock and roll area. And my teacher at the time said at Boston Conservatory, told me, Anna Maria, I don't really know what you're going to do because your voice doesn't do that. And it's going to be very hard for you to find your place within the Broadway musical where it's going right now. And with a heavy heart, I said, oh no, I've got to go into opera, And I'm so glad I have. It's a much more fulfilling for me personally, just much deeper and beautiful. But although you have the classics in musicals, those are the ones that I love. You've got the Rodgers and Hammerstein, and you have West Side Story, Leonard Bernstein.
But they're very singable.
They are, and
they need singers.
They need the legit, what we call the legit operatic training for those, and that's why an operatic voice works for those musicals. But the more pop musical, you have to have that rock sound. And in making a very, very vulnerable confession, I wanted to be a rock singer, really, as a kid, and I wanted to be Stevie Nicks. Yes, I had rumors when it came out. I was the only kid in my class who did. Great album, one of the greatest ever. And I just couldn't do that. My voice just didn't respond. And so thank goodness I found my little niche,
Time for one more. Oh, it's so hard. Yes. I actually avoided that question.
Yeah? I could be very diplomatic and say, it's a team effort, and they're each equally. I'd say when there's good harmony and good teamwork, everybody has their space in which to voice their opinions and what they'd like to do. And there's some staging rehearsals where the conductor has very specific views and will share those. And if you have a very open stage director, they will welcome that. I've seen it where it doesn't work. And then you can tell by the next rehearsal they've had a very productive conversation. and each one is just sticking to their, vision. But it should be a collaborative effort. It really should be. And also from our standpoint, we are going to have a lot of things to say and offer as well.
But wouldn't you say the perfect marriage between a conductor and a director is a conductor that understands theater and a director who understands music?
Yes, that in a perfect world, no, but it does exist. It does exist, and that's when we feel most comfortable, most nurtured, and where we can reach our greatest level of creation within that group. Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't seen Othello yet, please go along to the Civic Opera House, and Anna Maria will break your heart. She will break your heart all over again next year when she comes back as Rusalka. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna Maria.
Thank you.